On a freezing Valentine's night in 2003, in the farming town of Millbrook, Michigan, a young woman stepped into the blinding snow and was never seen again. Her name was Sarah Chen, a 23-year-old nursing student who had spent her evening studying at home with her boyfriend Derek Martinez. At 9:47 p.m., she left her neighbor's house carrying a steaming mug, her red winter coat glowing against the white storm. Just minutes later, she vanished into the blizzard without a trace. Her footprints, clearly pressed into the snow, suddenly ended 15 feet from her front door as if the storm itself had swallowed her whole. The house was locked from the inside, her belongings untouched, and not a single sign explained how she had disappeared from her own yard on that impossible night. How can a young woman vanish from a locked house in the middle of a blizzard? Who was behind the disappearance that haunted this town for decades? If you want to uncover the answers to these haunting questions, like this video and subscribe to my channel Unscripted Tales and tell me from which city you are watching. Let us complete 5,000 likes on this story so we can continue to uncover the truth together. Valentine's Day had arrived with a blizzard that would dump 14 inches of snow across Gratiot County. Sarah had borrowed a mug from her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Elena Vance, earlier that evening, and returned it before heading home. Mrs. Vance watched her from the kitchen window, seeing Sarah pull her coat tight against the wind before stepping into the storm. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. At 10:34 p.m., Derek Martinez called the county sheriff's department in panic. He explained that Sarah had gone to return the mug nearly an hour earlier and never came back. Derek had searched the house frantically, calling her name through every room, checking closets, even the basement crawl space where they kept holiday decorations. The front door was locked from the inside, the back door secured with the chain lock, every window tightly sealed for the winter. Her purse sat on the counter, her phone was charging by the bed, and her textbooks were spread across the dining room table. Everything was exactly as Sarah had left it. Mrs. Vance provided the only clear timeline. She said Sarah had seemed perfectly normal, chatting briefly about the storm and about her Valentine's plans with Derek. Sarah had not appeared worried or distressed, only tired from long clinical rotations at the county hospital. Mrs. Vance had made hot chocolate during their conversation and waved goodbye as Sarah disappeared into the snow. Yet within those next 47 minutes, Sarah was gone forever. Deputy Wallace, a seasoned officer with 22 years of service, arrived that night, expecting another routine missing person report. Instead, he found a house that seemed frozen in time, with Sarah's presence lingering everywhere, yet her body missing. Her coat had last been seen, her mug was left behind, and her candles still flickered on the mantel. It was as if Sarah Chen had stepped outside her door and vanished into thin air. When the storm finally quieted, Millbrook woke to the chilling news that Sarah Chen was missing. Neighbors gathered in whispers, staring at the snow-covered houses as if the storm itself had swallowed her. The only solid account came from Mrs. Elena Vance, who repeated her last moments with Sarah. She said Sarah had been cheerful, even excited, looking forward to Valentine's dinner with Derek. They had spoken about the storm, shared a laugh about the borrowed mug, and nothing in Sarah's words suggested fear or trouble. Mrs. Vance's memory placed Sarah walking out the door and stepping into the snow with nothing unusual in her behavior. Deputy Wallace, who had arrived at Sarah's rental house that night, could not shake a feeling deep inside. He had dealt with countless missing persons reports, most tied to family arguments or someone running away, but something about Sarah's absence felt heavier, darker. He stood inside her home, while the wind battered the windows and felt the eerie stillness, as if the house itself knew a secret it could not share. Everything in that home told the story of a young woman planning her future, not one preparing to disappear. At dawn, the phone call reached Lansing, where Sarah's mother, Linda Chen, was getting ready for her early shift. She listened as Derek's broken voice told her what had happened. Her world shattered in a moment. Sarah was her only child, a responsible young woman who never missed a Sunday call, who never forgot to send flowers on Mother's Day. Linda refused to believe she had vanished on her own. She drove 87 miles through treacherous roads to Millbrook, her heart filled with dread that was colder than the February air. By noon, Linda had turned Sarah's rental house into a search center. She spread county maps across the table, marked possible search zones, and called her workplace to say she would not be returning for some time. Linda knew systems failed people like her family. She had seen it before when her husband died in a factory accident. She swore that if Sarah was going to be found, it would be because someone loved her enough to never give up. But the official investigation quickly revealed fault lines. Detective Raymond Morrison, a veteran who had left Detroit homicide for what he thought would be a quieter life, looked at Sarah's case with skepticism. He explained to Linda that young women sometimes left suddenly, sometimes argued with boyfriends, sometimes needed space. To him, Derek might be lying. Sarah could have slipped out a window and left without telling anyone. Morrison questioned Derek heavily and looked more into his financial troubles and their arguments than into the impossible circumstances of her disappearance. The town itself became divided. Sarah's classmates from nursing school organized search parties, trudging through the heavy snow with flashlights and hope. Local churches brought meals and offered prayers. Yet at the same time, others whispered doubts. Some said Derek's gambling problems made him suspicious. Others believed Sarah had staged her own vanishing act, maybe overwhelmed by the pressure of school and family expectations. The whispers grew louder as Derek struggled, unable to keep paying the rent without her. Within weeks, he moved back to his parents' home, and many in town looked at him with suspicion instead of sympathy. In the middle of that small town, where every person knew their neighbor, lines were drawn. Some defended Derek as a heartbroken young man, while others were certain he had played a role in Sarah's disappearance. The storm had ended, but the cloud of mystery that hung over Millbrook only grew darker. The real question was whether the truth would come from the locked house, from the snowy yard, or from the secrets people carried silently behind their doors. The first weeks of the search for Sarah Chen revealed just how fragile the small town of Millbrook truly was. Gratiot County had only 12 full-time deputies to cover more than 500 square miles of farmland, villages, and scattered homes. Each deputy was stretched thin, running from drug busts to domestic disputes, and Sarah's disappearance quickly became one case among many. To Linda Chen, it felt like her daughter's life was slipping into the background while the system carried on with business as usual. Rumors filled the silence where answers should have been. At the diner where neighbors gathered each morning, people whispered that Derek Martinez must have done something terrible. His gambling problems and money troubles became part of the story told over coffee cups. Others dismissed Derek entirely and suggested Sarah had planned everything herself. They said she was ambitious, tired of small-town life, and maybe she had staged her disappearance to escape quietly. Every theory created a deeper divide in the community, where some insisted Sarah was still out there, while others claimed she had chosen to vanish. The crime scene only deepened the mystery. Investigators had photographs of Sarah's footprints, pressed into the snow, each step leading from Mrs. Vance's house toward her own front door. But 15 feet away from safety, the tracks simply ended. There were no signs of a struggle inside her home. No broken locks, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture. Her textbooks were still open, her phone charging, her purse resting neatly on the counter. The house looked untouched, as though Sarah had stepped outside for only a moment and had been swallowed by the night itself. False leads began pouring in. A waitress in Flint was certain she had served a young Asian woman who looked like Sarah. A bus driver in Detroit remembered a quiet passenger who avoided eye contact. A hotel clerk in Traverse City insisted he had checked in someone matching. Sarah's description. Each tip forced investigators to travel, interview, and dig, only to return empty-handed. The sightings carried hope, but each time they ended in disappointment, leaving Linda more exhausted and the deputies more unwilling to believe the case would ever move forward. As the months dragged on and the seasons changed, search parties shrank. Volunteers who had once walked snowy fields now returned to their daily lives. The story of Sarah Chen became a quiet ache in Millbrook, one people avoided speaking about too loudly. By February 2004, the official investigation was reclassified as a cold case. Files were boxed and stored, evidence sealed away, and the weight of unanswered questions pressed down on everyone who had once believed answers were close. What no one yet realized was that the silence surrounding Sarah's disappearance would soon draw in someone whose obsession with the case would consume him completely. By the winter of 2005, Sarah Chen's name had become a cold file stored in the evidence room, her disappearance just another unsolved case in rural Michigan. But when Detective James Sullivan transferred to Gratiot County, the file caught his attention in a way no other case ever had. Sullivan, known to his colleagues as Jimmy, had spent 15 years with the Michigan State Police, solving murders, testifying in trials, and tracking down suspects with nothing more than scraps of evidence. He came to Millbrook seeking quiet, but the mystery of Sarah Chen would not let him rest. At first, he told himself he was only reviewing the case to understand the county's history of major crimes. But the more he read, the deeper he sank. He stayed late at the office, flipping through interview transcripts until the pages grew thin from his constant handling. The photographs of Sarah's final steps in the snow seemed to call out to him. Those footprints, ending abruptly just feet from her front door, refused to leave his thoughts. What others had dismissed as an impossible mystery, Sullivan saw as a puzzle that demanded to be solved. Before long, his obsession followed him home. His spare bedroom became a second investigation site. Crime scene photographs were pinned across the walls. Timeline charts stretched across a folding table. Filing cabinets overflowed with copies of every report, every testimony, every lead, no matter how small. His refrigerator filled with takeout containers as his evenings vanished into endless hours of study. He drove the rural roads at night, retracing the paths Sarah might have walked, staring at fields that had once been searched, hoping to see what others had missed. Sullivan believed he saw something others had overlooked. Studying the original photographs, he noticed that the snow around Sarah's rental house was not random. To him, the patterns suggested disturbance, subtle signs that someone had altered the snow to mislead investigators. He pored over weather records, calculating wind speeds and snowfall, convinced that the crime scene had been carefully staged. To others, it sounded like desperate speculation, but to Sullivan, it was the first hint of how Sarah's disappearance had been made to look impossible. Sheriff Patricia Hayes admired his dedication at first, but as months turned into years, concern replaced encouragement. She watched Sullivan's reports on other cases grow thinner, his court appearances delayed, his health strained. Yet she also knew he was the only one who still carried Sarah Chen's case in his heart. Removing him would mean letting the mystery fade forever, and so she allowed him to continue in a limited capacity, even as she feared the case would consume him completely. No one could imagine then that Sullivan's obsession would one day be the very thing that would bring the first real answers after 16 long years of silence. For years, Detective James Sullivan lived with the weight of Sarah Chen's mystery pressing against his every thought. He studied the case until his eyes blurred, and still the answer never came. But in March of 2019, 16 years after that snowy night, the silence finally cracked. A phone call from the Michigan State Police Laboratory would change everything. Dr. Angela Martinez, a forensic DNA analyst, had been re-examining old evidence with new technology that had not existed in 2003. Among the preserved items was Sarah's red winter coat, hanging untouched since the morning after her disappearance. Fibers from that coat, once thought to hold no useful clues, revealed something extraordinary. Hidden within them was male DNA, extracted through advanced methods that could now read even the faintest genetic material. Alongside the DNA, traces of a commercial-grade soap were found, the kind used not in homes but in hospitals, schools, and other institutions. For Sullivan, who had spent half his career circling this mystery, the news sent a shiver through his hands as he wrote down the findings. CODIS, the national DNA database, could compare the profile against millions of records. But when the results came back, there was no immediate match. The case could have stalled again, but Sullivan refused to let it. If technology could provide the profile, then he would find the man who matched it. He began a painstaking search through Sarah's connections, her hospital rotations, her part-time job at a medical supply company, and the people interviewed in the first chaotic weeks of the investigation. Slowly, he narrowed the field. Finally, in April 2019, a perfect match appeared. The DNA belonged to Robert Vance, known in town simply as Bob. He was Mrs. Elena Vance's nephew, the same man who had been in his aunt's kitchen the night Sarah vanished. A man questioned briefly in 2003, then dismissed without suspicion. Bob Vance was no drifter or outsider. He was a maintenance supervisor at the county medical center, respected by co-workers, trusted by neighbors, and admired by churchgoers. He fixed broken doors for the elderly, shoveled driveways, and never missed a Sunday service. His reputation was clean, his criminal record nearly empty. But beneath that carefully crafted image was something far darker. Quiet testimonies revealed that Bob had shown unusual interest in young women, particularly nursing students. He asked about their schedules, their homes, their routines. At the time, his curiosity was dismissed as awkwardness. Now, through the lens of DNA, it was clear evidence of something far more dangerous. After 16 years of doubt, silence, and speculation, the truth had finally placed a name at the center of the mystery. Yet proving what had happened to Sarah would require more than science. It would demand breaking through the mask of a man who had lived among them, hiding in plain sight all along. Detective James Sullivan knew that confronting Robert Vance could not be rushed. After 16 years of silence, after decades of living behind a mask of trust and reliability, Bob would not simply admit the truth. Sullivan began carefully, arranging what appeared to be routine follow-up interviews in April 2019. He sat across from Bob at the county medical center, speaking calmly about the original investigation. At first, Bob answered with the same steady voice he had used in 2003. But beneath his composure, Sullivan noticed the cracks. His eyes darted toward the door. His breathing grew shallow. His hands trembled no matter how tightly he clasped them together. When Sullivan mentioned that new forensic testing had been applied to the evidence, Bob's calm began to dissolve. He stumbled over details that he had once recited with precision. He began offering explanations before questions were even asked, an unmistakable sign of a guilty conscience scrambling to stay ahead of the truth. The pressure mounted during their second meeting. Sullivan revealed that male DNA had been recovered from fibers on Sarah's coat. The effect on Bob was immediate. His face drained of color, his body shook, and he excused himself only to be heard vomiting in the restroom. When he returned, his voice quavered as he insisted on his innocence, but his mask was slipping away with every passing moment. Finally, during the third interview on April 22nd, Sullivan delivered the revelation. The DNA had produced a confirmed match. He did not say the name aloud, instead letting silence fill the room. Bob's body seemed to collapse under the weight of it. His skin turned gray, his hands shook violently, and his breathing came in desperate gasps. And then, in a whisper almost too soft to hear, he spoke words Sullivan had been waiting nearly 2 decades to hear. "I never meant for it to happen the way it did. Sarah was such a sweet girl. She did not deserve what I did to her. What followed was not a clean statement, but a broken confession. Between sobs and silences, Bob admitted that he had followed Sarah from his aunt's house on the night of the blizzard. He claimed he used his aunt's spare key to enter Sarah's rental home. There, he confronted her with intentions she rejected. A struggle followed, and Sarah struck her head on the kitchen counter. Bob insisted her death was accidental, but the guilt in his voice betrayed a darker truth. He explained that he spent hours in her house deciding what to do. At last, he placed her body in his medical center maintenance truck and drove away to what he called a place where she could rest peacefully. But when pressed for the exact location, his words grew vague, speaking of water, of an old oak, of a place that sounded like dozens scattered across the county. Bob admitted that he locked the doors from the inside, exited through a basement window, and carefully disturbed the snow to hide his tracks. He left Sarah's own footprints untouched, creating the illusion that she had simply vanished. For years, investigators had wondered how the scene could look so impossible. Now they knew it was the work of a man who had studied crime shows and crime books, carefully staging every detail. The confession had revealed the truth of what happened that night. But Sarah's body was still missing. And without it, the most important answers remained buried in silence. On April 24, 2019, the quiet town of Millbrook shattered. Robert Vance, the trusted handyman, the helpful nephew, the man who had attended Sarah Chen's memorial and searched fields alongside volunteers, was arrested for her murder. For 16 years he had lived in plain sight, drinking coffee with neighbors, fixing broken fences, and kneeling at church pews. Now the mask was gone, and the town saw him for what he truly was. The shock was unbearable. People who had known him since childhood felt betrayed, questioning whether they had ever truly known the man they welcomed into their homes. Conversations at diners and churches turned into hushed murmurs of disbelief and anger. For Derek Martinez, the arrest brought both relief and sorrow. For years, suspicion had followed him like a shadow. Whispers at diners, sidelong glances in grocery stores, quiet accusations that he was the one responsible. No matter how many times he told the truth, no matter how much he cooperated, the doubt never left. Now, with Bob Vance in custody, Derek was vindicated. But the relief carried a deep sadness. Vindication could not erase the years of pain, the friendships lost to mistrust, or the life he once dreamed of building with Sarah. For Linda Chen, the news arrived like a storm of its own. 16 years of waiting, fighting, and hoping collapsed into a single moment when Detective Sullivan's voice told her the truth. Her daughter had been taken by a man she had trusted, a man who had once stood in her kitchen offering condolences. Linda felt both devastation and relief. At last, she knew who was responsible. At last, the lies and speculation had ended, but the truth carried no peace. Sarah's body was still missing, hidden in a place Bob described only in fragments. Linda held on to a mother's desperate hope that one day she could bring her daughter home. The community of Millbrook was left to face the chilling reality that evil had not come from an outsider. It had lived among them, wearing the face of a neighbor, hiding behind kindness, and thriving in trust. For 16 years, Bob Vance had blended into their lives, a reminder that sometimes the greatest darkness hides behind ordinary smiles. And so, the story of Sarah Chen came to a close, not with a discovery in the snow, but with the truth finally dragged into the light. It was a truth that broke hearts, ended years of suspicion, and forced a small town to confront the fragility of the safety they thought they knew. If you are still watching this story, it means this story deserves your like and subscribe. Please, help me reach 5,000 likes on this story because that is the target set from my mother. It is totally free, and your support means everything. Tell me from which city you are watching this story, and let us keep Sarah Chen's memory alive together.